Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms and the associated websites. So information, resources, activities for people who work across the globe in and around medical communications, education and publishing. The great thing about this technology is we can bring people in from all over the world. We've got a panel of people from all over the world and an audience from all over the world. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I've been looking forward to today for a while, actually. I'm looking forward to hopefully a lively discussion. We're talking about the use of AI in developing PLS. And you guys have just presented this results last week, in fact, at the ISMAP annual meeting, which is what we've been sort of waiting for. So well done on that. I'm hoping you're going to provide us with plenty to think about. I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to hand over to David to introduce ourselves. But members of the audience, we're going to run a Q&A at the end. Please do join in with your own comments and observations and questions. But David, over to you.
Great, thank you, Peter, and thanks very much for the invitation to come onto this webinar and share some of our research with you. We've conducted a series of 3 studies over the past year, presented at various different places, including ISMAP in Washington, DC last week. So hopefully the audience find this interesting. My name is David McMinn. I lead the Plain Language Summary workstream at Sorcero, which is a technology company based in the US that provides AI-based solutions for the medical affairs and publications teams of pharmaceutical companies and associated agencies as well. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this session, and I'll hand over to Walter to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, Peter. Yeah, again, thank you for the opportunity to share what we've been working on. My name's Walter Bender. I'm one of the co-founders of Sorcero, and I'm the chief scientific officer. I'm sort of the person they keep in the back room. Just a little bit of background. The first half of my career was at MIT, where I shared an office with Marvin Minsky and Oliver Selfridge. Let me hand it over to Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Watts. I am a senior medical writer at Lumanity, which is a medical writing agency. There, I'm also a part of our Generative AI Knowledge Center. And so the research that we're presenting today came out of the work that I do in participation with that group.
And lastly, I'm Tom Grant. I'm publications lead at UCB for the neurology projects, and I've got an interest in AI, which is why I've hooked up with these bright AI folks.
Thanks, Tom. I'll include myself in that bright description there. I'm not sure if I've ever been described as that before, but I'll take it. Okay, so let's make a start. The plan is to present some findings, and then we'll get into a bit of discussion. So please continue to contribute any questions into the Q&A or comments in the chat, which will be well received. A bit of background before I hand over to Walter to get stuck into the findings. Looking at the current PLS landscape, so PLS being plain language summaries, which is a summarization of complex scientific language into language that a non-expert would understand. A couple of interesting studies to share with you here. The one on the left, the researchers looked at more than 4,000 plain language summaries, Cochrane plain language summaries of interventional studies, and they looked at the readability of those. And what they found was that their conclusion at the bottom left here, I'll just read it out. They conclude that the analysis of readability indicated that they may be difficult to read for the lay population without medical education. Our results indicate that PLSs may not be so plain, and that the writing of Cochrane PLSs requires more effort. The study on the right-hand side, they looked at 16 PLSs of randomized controlled trials, and they found that no lay summary met the recommended reading age for healthcare information. None of them were considered easy to read. In fact, over 85% were considered difficult to read. And just recently, last week at ISMAP, there was an interesting study presented by the team at Lockwood showing that on a historical analysis of PLS readability over the past 10 years, there's been no improvement in the readability of these. So really, it's a bit of an indictment on the field, if you like. Currently, we're not doing these as well as we could be. they're not meeting the standards to make them accessible to the broader population. So that raises the question, can we do better, and if so, how? One way to do this might be through the use of artificial intelligence. What do we mean by that? Well, broadly speaking, in this context, we're talking about generative AI, and this is the technique used to generate any new content. So that could be text, it could be images, it could be video, and that's based on a corpus of existing content. In the specific context of plain language summary generation, we're talking about large language models, and that's the specific class of generative AI that's used to generate text. So hopefully that provides the unmet need, if you like, for what we're doing, and a bit of context for you, and I'll be happy to hand over to Walter to take us through some of the findings.
As David mentioned, we actually conducted 3 studies. The first study is one that David and I discussed with Peter quite some time ago already. And the goal of this study was really just to see, can generative AI, and in particular a bespoke approach to generative AI, actually generate plain language summaries that meet the grade level reading guidelines that are being put forward by regulators and by medical organizations. So we took actually the slide's a little bit backwards. We started off by identifying PLS abstract summaries generated by human medical writers, and then found the corresponding original scientific abstracts, and then from the original scientific abstracts used a bespoke AI process to generate draft summaries used from the AI. And we applied a number of different reading metrics to all 3 sets of abstracts, and had an SME team assess the quality of the abstracts as well. So next slide, please, David. And what we found was that the bespoke AI process was able to generate plain language summary abstracts that were more readable in terms of grade level analysis than either of the other 2 approaches, and to a significant level. So this was really sort of the baseline. We demonstrated that we could use AI to meet the readability requirements. And we found that the SMEs also thought that these AI-generated summaries held their accuracy, held their utility. So that was the preamble to what we did at ISMPP. Could you go to the next slide, please, David? So this study was a little bit more complicated. It's one that we did with UCB, and thank you, Tom, for all the help on that. Now we started with 6 abstracts from scientific abstracts that were from the rare disease and from rheumatology, some phase 2 studies, phase 3 studies, and a survey-based study. And we applied both a off-the-shelf process for generating a non-bespoke process for generating plain language abstracts, and the same bespoke process we used in the first study to generate plain language abstracts. And we used those abstracts as a starting point for medical writers in order to generate draft summaries. So the idea was start either from the original scientific abstract, start from a non-bespoke generated abstract, or start from the bespoke generated abstract, and see whether or not we were helping medical writers in terms of time and effort, B, whether we were maintaining a level of accuracy necessary in this industry, and C, we did a 3rd phase of the study, which was we asked PCPs whether or not they thought that the output that was being generated was suitable for explaining the study to their patients. So we were looking at, are we saving time and effort? Are we maintaining quality? And is this result useful to our end goal of explaining things to patients? So next slide, please. And in fact, when we had the time and effort measurements from the medical writers, we found that the a 41% reduction in the amount of time necessary to generate a draft when the medical writers started from the abstract generated by the bespoke process. So clearly the AI is capable of helping the medical writers save time. We've got significant results in that regard. Next slide, please, David. And in fact, it also saved in self-reported effort. And we checked the self-reported effort by calculating something called a Levenstein distance, which looks at just literally how many character changes do you have to get from the draft they started from to the final output they created. How many changes in terms of inserts, deletions, character changes and the like, and that correlated with the time and effort. Fewer changes needed when they started for the bespoke AI process to generate the output they needed. Next, please, David. And now we hand over to Laura.
Thank you, Walter. So for our third study, what we were interested in is, again, in assessing the readability of plain language summary abstracts that were developed by generative AI versus a human medical writer or a medical writer, as well as how those were received by a learner or a reader. So for this study, we used PubMed to identify plain language summary abstracts that had associated scientific abstracts written with them. So our original scientific abstracts came from infectious disease or oncology. Again, we used the plain language summary abstracts that were published with these to serve as our medical writer plain language summary abstracts. And then we used input from the original scientific abstract to develop a generative AI developed plain language summary abstract, that bespoke AI method that Walter mentioned. So as with study one, we used a number of standard readability metrics to determine the readability of this. And again, these metrics are looking at things like the number of words in the text, the amount of jargon that's used, the number of syllables in a word. So standard formulas that can be applied across the text. And then we developed our own readability metric, which we referred to as the Comprehensive Readability Assessment Scale. This looked at 11 different items, looking at readability, comprehensibility, jargon use, and so on. And we had readers use this scale, which was on a 1 to 5 point. It was a Likert scale ranging from 1 being very poor to 5 being excellent. And we asked our survey respondents who took the survey online to read the original scientific abstracts for context, as well as the associated plain language summary abstracts that came from either medical writers or from our bespoke AI method. They were blinded to which they were reading, so they didn't know which one they were looking at. And we asked them again to use this readability assessment scale to rank these abstracts. If you'll go to the next slide, David. And so in accordance with study one, we found that regardless of the readability metric that we were looking at, that the bespoke AI model produced plain language summary abstracts that were much more readable. And so for the original scientific abstracts, as you can imagine, these typically scored grade levels somewhere between high school up to college or beyond, so ranging from about 12.8 to 17.1. The average readability score for the plain language summary abstracts that were written by medical writers was 13.7. So if we just average all of the scales that we developed here, so again, being at a college level, which is not where we're typically aiming for. So the dotted line that you're looking at here is a 6th grade reading level, which when we're talking about materials that are meant to be used for patient education, typically you're looking around a 6th to 8th grade target for that readability. In terms of the plain language summary abstracts developed by the bespoke AI model, the average for this was about 8.9, so getting much closer to that target readability. If you can go to the next slide, David. So we had two different groups assess the abstracts, just the plain language summary abstracts, using that comprehensive readability assessment scale that I mentioned. The first group were medical writers or professional medical writers that worked within an agency. So for this, we had 22 different medical writers assess. Again, they were blinded to this assessment, and pretty much across the board, we found that when grading the plain language summary abstracts developed by the bespoke AI method versus those that were written by medical writers, that the score was much higher. So unlike the prior scale, where a lower score, if you're looking at the readability metrics, the lower the number, the better the readability, the lower the grade level. In this case, the higher the score, the better. And so what you'll see is for the bespoke plain language summary abstracts, the scores were higher. And again, the metric for this is going from poor to good, or good to very good, or very good to excellent. And so a 1-point difference can actually be somewhat meaningful. So the biggest differences that we saw here in terms of medical writers doing the assessment were for jargon usage and inclusion of key data, as well as the accuracy of the content. David, if you can go to the next slide. For the plain language summary abstracts that were scored by our patients and patient advocates, we had 5 respondents for this. And again, pretty much across the board, with the exception of a couple of factors such as accuracy of content, that's the plain language summary abstracts scored the same. For the most part, the plain language summary abstracts developed using the bespoke AI model were assessed as of better quality, or were more highly rated. And in terms of where we saw the biggest differences here, the biggest differences were observed for jargon usage and, interestingly, empathy and understanding, where our patients and patient advocates actually found that the plain language summary abstracts developed using generative AI were actually more empathetic, or more came across as having more understanding. So David, if you could go to the next slide. So I think, like all good research, we were left with a lot of questions as we were looking at the results of this, in terms of, not just what the capabilities of generative AI, but how are people using this. And so if individuals who are joining today would be willing, we would love to get your thoughts. We've put together a very quick survey. It's only a few questions. It's very straightforward. We're simply just asking people, are you using this? And if you are using generative AI, where do you think it holds the most promise? So I think the findings that we have shown today demonstrate that in terms of plain language summary abstracts, that there's great potential for generative AI, but we're just curious, where else in medical writing or in the pharmaceutical industry do we think generative AI might be applied effectively and efficiently? So if you would be willing to participate, you can just take a quick snapshot of this QR code. This is going to take you to an anonymous survey, so you don't have to put any personal information. However, if you would like the results, we would be absolutely thrilled to share them with you. At the very end, if you want to put in your email address, we can send those results to you. So if you're interested in these findings as well. So this survey is going to stay open probably through the end of the week. So anybody who's watching the recorded message, if you try to take the survey after the end of the week, it may not be live any longer. All right, so hopefully folks have had a chance to take a snapshot. If you can go to the next slide, David. So overall, what we have demonstrated with the studies that we have done here is that collectively, when we look at the findings of studies 1, 2, and 3 that were performed, across the board, we have found that depending, or regardless of the standard readability metric that we've used, that when we look at plain language summary abstracts that are developed using the assistance of our bespoke AI process, that they are far more readable. So I think that we've we've demonstrated that on numerous occasions, again, using a variety of different scales. But what's interesting is that when we look at the learner or the user, we are also finding that the quality of these are typically judged as being of better quality. So this was true whether we were looking at subject matter experts, primary care physicians who were using the information to, again, relay scientific information to patients, when professional medical writers are scoring these, as well as when patients are patients advocates. So collectively, we found that the information is not only more readable, but as the readability is deemed as giving them better quality. And we also found that when we're just looking at the amount of time and effort that's required to develop this scientific content, that generative AI can be a real advantage there, so that it reduces both the amount of time that's needed to develop the scientific content as well as the amount of effort that's needed to generate it. So with that, I'm going to pass on to Tom.
Thanks, Laura.
All right.
Yeah, just a few bullets in relation to the publications manager perspective. Just first of all, reflecting on some of the perceived benefits, in that from a pub manager perspective, the AI assistance provides us with plain language summaries that are more fit for purpose. For example, more readable and of better quality, and as evidenced by the findings from these studies. Also, there seems to be greater efficiency with regards to development of the first draft plain language summaries. And of course, that may in turn lead to potential for cost savings. And of course, our procurement teams within pharmaceutical industry are always interested in cost savings. And in terms of some of the challenges, I think firstly, building trust generally across the industry and using AI to assist with medical communications deliverables. And here we're talking about plain language summaries, and of course that might evolve into other deliverables too. I think also getting alignment on disclosure requirements and also acceptance of AI assistance by publishers is going to be a challenge. There's already a divergence with one or two big general medical journals. There's currently limited guidelines on AI use in medical communications. I saw a comment flash up quickly during, I think it was Laura's section on whether there were guidelines. And so I can foresee this might feature in the next GPP version that comes out, whenever that is. And also another challenge relates to, ability to have secure platforms for potentially sensitive data. And I'd be quite interested to hear from Walter, for example, on aspects of this, whether putting, how secure or insecure is data that we may put into these systems. And then personally, in terms of future direction, I can see evolution from textual plain language summaries to other more visual formats, such as graphical abstracts, infographics, and perhaps even video abstracts. So I see this as just the start, and that there's much more to come in the future. Next slide, David, please. So this slide really provides acknowledgements in terms of funding, disclosures, and indeed our contact details. And I'd just like to also personally acknowledge my co-authors in relation to study 2 from UCB, and that's Margarita Lenz, Veronica Borquez, and Chris Rapier. On to the next slide, please, David. And I think we're here at the Q&A section, Peter.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, guys. Can we lose the slide then, David? And we'll enjoy hopefully a lively conversation here. It's been interesting seeing some of the questions coming in, and hopefully we can pick up some of those. Please, those of you in the audience, please keep coming with your not just questions but comments, observations, and if you want to, please be as provocative as you like, frankly. Can I start? Can I start with a basic question? And I'm pleased a couple of people have asked the same question actually, so it's not just me being stupid. And Walter, maybe to you, can you just give us a bit more of an understanding in simple terms? What you've used the bespoke AI terminology, but I'm not sure, unless I missed it, that you actually explained quite what you meant by bespoke AI. And I think that's going to be one of the problems with this conversation is there's going to be lots of people not quite understanding what we're talking about, and with the AI tools, but also with PLS. We'll come back to that in a minute. But can you explain what you mean by bespoke AI? Because I think that's a bit fundamental to this. And apologies if I just missed it.
No, you didn't miss it. I just glossed over it for the sake of time,
Okay.
but I thought we'd get into this. So let me just explain the non-bespoke approach first, which was we simply took the original scientific abstract, a simple prompt to ChatGPT, and said, please take this abstract, summarize it at a readability or grade level of sixth grade. So
I'm going to keep interrupting. Sorry. When you say ChatGPT, were we talking about the free version 3, the pro version? Just give us a bit more, because there's quite a big difference.
3.5,
Okay.
ChatGPT 3.5 through their web interface.
Okay.
It was just a vanilla,
Okay.
sort of typical of what people are using for
To play with
when they're experiencing AI right now, generative AI right
Okay.
now. The bespoke process is actually also using a generative AI, but it's actually doing quite a bit of data preparation upfront in order to organize and focus the application of the AI. And then it does quite a bit of validation on the back end in order to make sure that that we can catch things like hallucinations, which are quite common in AI, and find terms that seem to be a little bit off. So you can imagine, for example, making a Venn diagram from all the concepts that were in the original article and all the concepts that were in the output of the AI, and seeing where those concepts overlap and where they're disjoint. So any concept that was in the original that isn't in the AI summary, you might want to say, well, maybe I missed something. And any concept that's in the AI summary that's not in the original, you can say that's probably a hallucination. That probably doesn't belong there. So these are some of the kinds of things that we surface in the process, the bespoke process, in order to help guide the medical writer as to where they might want to look in terms of using this as a starting point. Don't rely on this, rely on that kind of thing. So there's a lot more structure in the process.
Okay, and to be clear, this is your own bespoke tool.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's still
okay. And I'm trying to. I think it's important just to spell this out to people, because there's lots of tools. There's lots of people with, and people get lots of very strong opinions based on a tool rather than the others. And I just think we really need to spell this out. So, so I'm understanding all that. I wanted also, I'm going a bit quickly just for a moment, because I think there's some basics I'd like to clarify. I mean, what was it, last January in 2023, I think I ran the first webinar about ChatGPT. What the heck is it in and around MedComms? And at that stage, we identified PLS as just being this is the sort of area where it could have an impact. And since then, there's been a lot of very lively argument about the rights and the wrongs and whether it does or doesn't work and all the rest of it. Okay, but PLS, one of the problems with PLS, and we've been talking about it for years, is the definitions of PLS vary so much. Yeah, and it's interesting seeing how many questions are coming in very quickly about, well, what exactly we mean. Who's the audience? I mean, one of the problems with this is I talk to people who go, well, PLS is about patients. And I talk to other people who go, well, PLS isn't about patients. It's about opening up access to a scientific paper beyond specialists to generalists. If you get into patients, are we talking about, a certain level of education or not, and so on and so forth. So I'd be interested in some more comments from all of you about how you're defining PLS and how PLS is defined in the audience, in the real world. But can we just clarify, because there's completely different opinions coming in across the chat rooms. You said, Laura, I think you were aiming your PLS in the third study at patients grades 6 to 8. Am I right? and there's a furious discussion going on about what that means in terms of age. Because I mean, for those of us at least outside the US, can you just put an age on that and say what we're aiming at, but then expand the discussion about this bigger question: is what the heck we're talking about in the first place?
Of course. So the readability metrics that we used are based on US grade levels. 6th to 8th grade reading level is somewhere between 11 to 13, 14, somewhere in that age range. I have done actually quite a bit of reading about exactly this question. What does it mean to be plain language? And the reality is, for scientific writing, there is no unique readability metric. So we don't have something that's unique to science that says, you know, it's going to take into consideration that some of the terminology that we use in order to maintain technical accuracy really shouldn't be condensed. And so there are some words, even naming drugs or naming diseases, can come across, if we're just looking at this kind of formulaic way of looking at it as how many syllables are in it, could come across as not very plain language. And so you could get something that has a very high score in terms of being unreadable. So somebody says, well, that's well beyond the reading capacity of a 13-year-old, for example. But the reality is condensing that word or making it any more plain, if you want to think of it that way, might lead to some technical inaccuracies that we just don't want to do. So I think there is a real need to have a readability metric that we could point to that does take into consideration some of the nuance that we need for scientific writing. With that said, study after study has been done looking at global readability and global literacy, particularly looking at it, since many of these readability metrics are based on US grade levels, looking at readability of a population within the United States. And for the most part, what they have found over and over and over again is that you're looking somewhere between 6th to 8th grade, depending on whether or not the information, as you mentioned, is being meant for a lay person, and if that individual is a generalist, versus a lay person if that individual is a patient or is not a scientist. So the FDA put out some guidelines quite some time ago, where essentially they were saying, when we're looking at products, if you're looking at package inserts, things to this effect, that when we're using highly advanced language, folks just either aren't going to read it, they're going to give up on it, or they're not going to understand it if they do. And so again, 6th to 8th grade was where they kind of landed in terms of what we should be targeting. In terms of, I saw another question coming out here related to the readability of this and where we should be targeting, whether or not it should just be for the abstract itself or for the entire article. The studies that we did here, having individuals read a large body of text, is quite time consuming. And so we did start with the abstract itself, because again, we wanted the respondents that were doing, at least in the study that I participated in, the original scientific abstracts, again, for contextualization at kind of an advanced level, but also we wanted them to read and compare the abstracts that were written both by a human and were written using generative AI. And if to ask people to do that and to ask a large number of individuals to do that, we wanted to give them something that they could do without spending hours and hours and hours taking the survey. But I absolutely agree. I think we have to figure out ways to get more information and not just distilling down maybe a conclusion, which is kind of what an abstract is serving to do. But we have to be able to convey larger amounts of information. And so I think we definitely need to explore more, how do we do this for full paper, full-length plain language summary abstracts? How can we use generative AI to make graphics more digestible and graphics more interpretable and so on? So I think there's still an unmet need there, and I still think that the generative AI holds great promise for this as well.
Okay, and so all I'm going to say is I still think we've got to be very careful with the basic terminology when we're talking about this, because even what you're saying, you're saying your tendency is to think of PLSs for patients, yeah? And
I
as I say, there is quite a strong debate about that, or
yeah, I
difference
think
in language.
I think we should make it accessible to as many individuals as we can, but yes, I do think that when we are making plain language summaries, we need to be mindful that, especially when we're thinking about things like rare disease, it is undebated that many individuals who have rare diseases are going to medical literature to inform themselves and educate themselves about their condition.
Okay.
And to the point where, speaking in plain language to them, they may say, well, I've already known this. I'm very well versed in it, and they've done quite a bit of research around this. But understanding that patients may be coming to our peer-reviewed scientific literature to get information about their own conditions, I think we do need to make it accessible to patients. I think for an accessibility and an equity standpoint, that's very important.
And I can't disagree with you. It's just every single individual is different. So you can't pitch your PLS at every single individual.
Actually.
Tom, can I just bring you in briefly? UCB, just what's the policy at UCB? Do you mandate, producing a PLS for every publication that's published, or what's your view on what the PLS should be targeted at? Can you just give us a sense from your point of view as a funder and this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not mandated as such at the moment, other than the regulatory PLS of clinical trials, which is a different thing. So what I've kind of started from the neurology space is really this graphical abstract space, looking to provide something that is suitable for the non-expert, but not necessarily way down the reading ages that Laura's described. But also, we've been developing plain language summaries where it's been mandated by the particular neurology journals that we've been where we've been submitting our articles. We also have a relatively new group within UCB, a patient engagement group. And so I think there the focus is going to be more and more towards the patient and the caregiver. And so, I can see that the trend will move more towards supporting that type of customer group as well. So I think we're quickly moving from a sort of aiming at this non-expert, and I think we'll be heading down towards the sort of patient carer kind of category with our summaries going forward.
Okay, there's a number of questions coming in, which I'm going to leave to one side at the moment in terms of how do the patients find the PLS in the first place and so on. That's sort of a different topic. I'd like us, because we are going to run out of time if we're not careful as usual. Let's focus in on the basic point here, and I get a basic message from what you're doing that use of AI backed up by humans is showing that you can speed it up, produce better quality and readability and so on. So it's all good, yeah? So why wouldn't everyone be doing this? David, from your point of view, poke the audience a little bit.
Sure. I think like with anything, this is a new technology and it's people are taking their time to find their way to it. Most agencies that I'm aware of are experimenting with this or have experimented with it in some capacity. I think customers will be assessing the landscape as to the offerings out there and what will work for them and what won't work for them. There's perhaps a degree of still uncertainty around the security point that I think perhaps that Tom raised and perhaps Walter can speak to as well. But I mean, the evidence now is, I would go as far to say, overwhelming. Last week at ISMPP, there were, I think, between 10 and 20 posters on this very topic. And I think bar one, they all showed a consistent message of the benefits of the use of AI. So I think it's a case of, there are some early adopters in the space. I think other people will catch up. I think there are nuances about how this can be integrated into business models, which is understandable. And I think once people figure out how to do that, and how to scale this, then I think it will be more widespread.
I think it's interesting what your graph effectively, was it study 2, was sort of like medical writers do better. AI plus medical writer does even better. A question came in fairly early from Anonymous. I mean, let's just read it out. Not meaning to diminish the value of Gen I, but to support medical writers in developing, not to diminish the value of Gen I in supporting the medical writers. But do your results simply suggest that medical writers in general need better education in the first place as to how to write for a lay audience? I mean, again, who knows? But what's your view, Laura? I mean, you talked to that a little bit. I mean, should medical writers just be better at doing the job? Are we missing the point there?
Well, I think one of the things that make the use of generative AI is helpful is we can, kind of build in on the front end our primes and prompts, and the system doesn't forget, right? So you can tell it right at a 6th grade reading level, and it's not going to forget to develop whatever the output is according to the reading level. And when we're writing in medicine, as a medical writer myself, there's so much information that we're typically trying to distill in. We're trying to incorporate not just maybe the individual finding itself, but we're trying to pull in kind of overall conclusions from the field. We're trying to convey very complex messages. And so sometimes the plain language piece can kind of get pushed to the wayside as we continue to work and as we continue to build and as we continue to kind of tinker with our deliverables. And so I think the value of generative AI in kind of starting off is it's going to give you very plain language, very common language, or very lay language at the outset, and then give a medical writer the opportunity to kind of work with that. And again, we've still got to keep in mind that if you start going back and putting in highly technical terms, or if you start putting in a lot of methodology that might start pulling away from that readability metric. We still have to be mindful of that as we're working with this. So I don't know if it's an education piece. My experience is the medical writers that I work with are highly educated. I think it's keeping in mind what the goal is, and generative AI can really assist with that. But in terms of these tools replacing, I mean, I've heard a lot of, is generative AI going to take our jobs? Are we still going to need humans for this? In my own experience in working with the system is it is a phenomenal tool, but it is not capable of replacing. And so we still have to go in and validate and make sure that the information is accurate. And in some cases, it'll say things that are it gets the point across, but even in my own experience in teaching and educating and writing, I still know a way that I can get it across better. So I have never taken any output that generative AI gave and not found places to improve it. So I think it makes for really compelling and interesting and great starting points. But I still think we have to have human fingerprints all over these outputs so that we're maintaining the integrity of what we're getting.
Okay, to be provocative, but I've said it a few times in these sorts of sessions. I mean, I feel that as human beings, we have a horrible tendency to put up with mediocrity. And as the procurement departments get involved and so on, and you go, well, if we just have to have, I mean, I think UCB, you said you didn't mandate it, but there are companies mandating PLS. If you get to a stage like that, let's be simplistic about it, and you go, well, everyone has to have a PLS. And the system can produce those PLSs faster, less expensively, people less likely to question some of the points that you're making, Laura. And I think I suspect that's just an inevitability, but I don't know. And there are people who will argue very, very vociferously with me that you cannot replace the expert writer. Can you make the expert writer more efficient? Can you make the not so expert writers better? Can you replace them? I don't know. I wanted to finish on perhaps a slightly technical discussion, and I don't know whether any of you got a view on this, but it's just a little thing that I've had in my mind for a long time when we're talking about this sort of thing. And it sort of covers a number of these problems that we've talked about. Can you imagine, let's put it this way, having some sort of publications database or something, and me as a person coming to that database with some sort of a bot on the front and just going, look, I am me. Tell me in my language what I need to know. And my friend or my colleague or my mum or my kid comes in. So there's no production of a PLS anymore. It's just an automated process that says you as an individual can very easily get in your language the information you want. I don't see why that's at all impossible. And I just wonder where we're at on that sort of technical line. And maybe Walter, you can start with, but just help me understand where we're at with that.
Yeah, so Peter, maybe in the next round with you and David and I, we can talk about some of the other work that David and I have been doing where we've been targeting not plain language summaries, but summaries of scientific content for scientists. So in fact, the same bespoke process we can use to target different grade levels, different levels of expertise, It's a tunable process. And to your point, we can also begin to look at things like region. The way I tell this to you, being someone in the UK, is going to be different than the way I tell it to somebody in Buenos Aires, for example. Not just Spanish versus English, but the local references, the local relevance. Those are all things that we can start to take into account in the process, in the bespoke process. So, but that, all that said, I think we're still quite a ways away from just releasing this into the wild without any human intervention. I like to quip that these AI systems are always certain, sometimes right. They love to speak with great confidence, but you really can't trust them. And I think we're a long ways away from being able to trust them. So I think your vision is spot on, but having it be a completely automated implementation, I think we're quite a ways.
Okay, anybody else got a view on this?
I'll say,
jump in. Tom, go on, Laura, go on.
oh, well, I was just going to quickly say, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, some of these tools, like if individuals are using just ChatGPT through OpenAI online, some individuals may actually be using it for just that purpose. So I think we need to be mindful of, as we are producing scientific content, we're trying to educate providers and, you know, the pharmaceutical industry and research and so on, that folks may be going and getting a very distilled message that doesn't have human oversight. And we need to keep that in mind as we're putting information out, that folks may, you know, if they're given a very quick answer, as you said, Peter, we might be okay with mediocrity. Some people may be doing very short prompts, looking for a specific answer, getting what they think is the correct answer, and then moving on and not digging any deeper, which I think is where that plain language aspect becomes so important, so that we can have accessible information that we could potentially point to and say, okay, that's not the full story that you got, or maybe here's more information that you can kind of flesh that out with a little bit. So I think it actually is quite important, as people are going to this personalized medicine, if you want to think of it that way, that we still have accessible and really well-sourced information that they can pull from.
Okay. And one of the things I think, for what's worth, is it's good to see now. So in education, for instance, at quite an early age, actually, you know, kids and young adults they've sort of gone, okay, we can't fight it. So that the lecturers, the teachers are going, we'll teach you to use these tools properly. And I just think that's fascinating, because it's not that long ago that the teachers and lecturers all went, you can't use it. And it was just like, you can't stop the wave either. So there's an educational thing happening out there, which is absolutely, so I think it's just absolutely fundamental, and it's changing a lot of stuff. It's those of us a bit older maybe who are looking at these tools and going, we don't quite understand, and we'll put a little prompt in and we get something out, it's not quite right. But I just think there's a vision here which I just get very excited about. Sorry, this is me again, I shouldn't be saying what I think. Tom, we should finish in a couple of minutes. So Tom, have you got a view or two on what we're talking about there?
Yeah, just as you were speaking, just to say that, I mean, within UCB, we've all been gifted Microsoft Copilot, so we do a little training program, and then we're let loose with Microsoft Copilot, which is sort of partly self-contained. But also, interestingly, you were talking about education and so on, and that UCB set up an AI Academy, where there's a series of workshops and training modules, etc., to upskill staff in AI. So you know, so there's a lot of so there's a recognition within UCB, and I'm sure other companies, to educate staff and basically tool us up so that we can use AI appropriately.
It's that adage, isn't it? It's not that AI is going to replace you as such. It's just the people who know how to use AI might replace you. David, we should finish with you. And it seems like a long time ago that you and I talked about this, the first study and so on and so forth. You know, over the last few months, I guess, you know, I think your evidence is just, it's straightforward. I think there's obviously something in it. But from your point of view, David, how do you see it? What have you changed your views at all? Have you, you know, can you see, I don't know, what's going to happen in the next year? maybe I won't push you into what's happening in the next 5 years, but over the next year, how do you see this playing out in real life?
Yeah, I'll get the crystal ball out. Well, first, thanks again, Peter, for this opportunity. I think we could have gone on for another hour chatting about a lot of the questions here. I think the kind of immediate next steps for this will be to expand the process out into larger documents, so things like the standalone plain language publications, and then investigate how can we bring in graphics accurately into these pieces so we've got a more complete deliverable at the end of it. So I think those are the two next immediate steps. In terms of practically implementing this, I think there will be a lot in the broader space about policy governing the use of these tools, security of using, sensitive customer data in these tools, in lockdown environments versus open environments. So I think those are the kind of big talking points in the next 12 months.
Okay. Okay. So I'm still looking at the comments flying around in the chat rooms and so on. So we've created some lively discussion out there. I think I'm going to close it now because we should do. We're slightly over time, but huge thanks to you guys. I think this is fascinating. The simple message seems to me very simple, but the devil's in the detail. And I'm sure there's lots of people will be thinking about how they're going to take on board what you're saying in terms of their own working practice and so on. Part of the point of these webinars is simply to put people in touch with each other. So I know I can say from all your points of view that you're very happy for anyone online today or watching the video to contact you, and LinkedIn's an easy way of doing that. So please do, everybody, talk to each other and keep the conversation going. Hashtag MedComms, I'll always push. Let's talk about this. I think the next year is going to be fascinating as people start to implement some of this stuff that maybe we've been holding back from. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to give us a little wave. Those of you online at the moment, don't all rush away because we can carry on talking for a few minutes. But thank you very much. Take care.